Deep inside a high-tech interrogation room, a powerful alien commander is trembling with fear. He has seen his entire fleet destroyed. That he looks at the human captain and asks, "How did you do it?" "Our sensors found no bombs, no lasers, and no soldiers," the commander whispers. "All we saw on your ship was a small, furry creature." What kind of biological monster is it? Outside, the Great War was almost over. The Vraxian swarm had destroyed 90% of the Alliance fleet, leaving only one ship behind. That ship was the USS Discovery. A small human vessel that everyone thought was weak and useless. The captain smiles and says, "That wasn't a weapon, Commander. That was Barnaby. He's just a cat." The stars were no longer beautiful. For the members of the Galactic Alliance, the tiny lights in the sky had become symbols of fear. A dark force known as the Vraxian swarm was moving through the galaxy, destroying everything in its path. The Vraxian swarm did not use big missiles or giant lasers. Instead, they used millions of tiny, metallic, shadow drones that were the size of small insects. These drones could fly into the engines of a ship, eat through the wires, and disable the most powerful shields in minutes. No computer could track them, and no laser could hit them. The Great War was being lost, not by a lack of power, but by a lack of focus. On the bridge of the Alliance flagship, Commander Cax looked at the holographic maps. Red lights showed the planets they had lost. Cax was a tall, lizard-like alien with 4 eyes and skin like gray stone. He was a master of war, but he was tired. He had requested help from the newest members of the Alliance, the humans. He expected the humans to arrive with massive warships, heavy armor, and new technology. He had heard stories of human bravery and their strange, creative minds. He hoped they had a secret weapon that could finally stop the shadow drones from eating his fleet. When the human ship, the USS Discovery, finally arrived, it was much smaller than Cax expected. It looked like a metal box with old engines. A small team of 3 humans walked onto the Alliance flagship. They weren't wearing heavy battle armor. They were wearing simple blue jumpsuits. But the strangest thing was what the human leader, Captain Miller, was carrying. In his hand was a small plastic box with a wire door. Something was moving inside the box. Commander Cax and his officers gathered around, their 4 eyes blinking in confusion. They thought this must be a high-tech biological scanner or a new type of organic bomb. "Captain Miller," Commander Cax said, his voice deep and serious. "The swarm is only 3 days away from our home planet. We are losing ships every hour because we cannot see the enemy. I hope you have brought the secret weapon we discussed. My people are dying, and our technology is failing us." The alien officers leaned in closer, trying to see what was inside the small plastic box. They expected to see a glowing crystal or a high-frequency jamming device. They were ready to see the future of warfare. Captain Miller smiled and set the box on the shiny, high-tech table. "Commander, I know things look bad," Miller said calmly. "But morale is the most important thing in a war. If the crew is stressed, they make mistakes. So, we brought someone to help keep everyone calm and happy." Miller reached down and opened the wire door. Out stepped a small, furry creature with bright orange fur and big, green eyes. It had a long tail that twitched back and forth. It walked onto the table, looked at the giant, scary alien commander, and let out a long, loud yawn. The room went completely silent. The alien officers looked at the orange creature, then at Captain Miller, then at each other. They scanned the creature with their handheld devices. "It has no weapons," the science officer whispered. "It has no electrical signals. It is just meat and fur." "Captain, what is this joke? We asked for a weapon to save our civilization, and you brought a tiny, sleeping animal." The aliens felt insulted. They felt that the humans were not taking the war seriously. They were facing extinction, and the humans had brought a pet. Captain Miller picked up the orange cat and started scratching it behind the ears. The cat began to make a low, vibrating sound, a purr that echoed in the quiet room. "This is Barnaby," Miller explained. "He's a cat. On Earth, we've lived with them for thousands of years. They are great for stress. Trust me, having him on the ship will change everything. Commander Cax slammed his fist on the table. He didn't care about stress, he cared about the shadow drones that were currently destroying his outer defense line. He felt like the humans had betrayed them. As the aliens argued and shouted at the humans, Barnaby the cat didn't seem to care. He jumped off the table and started exploring the room. He walked past the giant computers and the glowing screens. Suddenly, Barnaby stopped near a dark corner where a bundle of wires came out of the wall. His green eyes became very wide, and his ears rotated toward the darkness. For a second, he looked less like a pet and more like a hunter. But then, he just sat down and started licking his paw. The aliens ignored him, thinking he was just a useless animal, unaware that the real war was about to begin right under their noses. The atmosphere inside the Alliance flagship grew heavy with tension. Commander Cax was in a terrible mood. Every time he looked at the bridge floor, he saw Barnaby the cat sleeping on a pile of worn cables. To Cax, the cat was a symbol of human laziness. The Vraxian swarm was getting closer, and their shadow drones were already starting to cause problems. These drones were tiny, silent, and made of a special material that reflected radar. They were like ghosts. One moment a ship's engine was fine, and the next moment, it was dead because the wires had been chewed into dust. The aliens used their most expensive scanners, but the screens always showed nothing. They were fighting an enemy they could not see, and the frustration was driving the crew to the point of madness. One night, while the ship was in deep space, the lights on the main bridge began to flicker. A low, rhythmic scratching sound started coming from inside the walls. It was a sound that made the alien's skin crawl. Commander Cax stood up, his 4 eyes darting around the room. He pulled out his high-tech scanner and waved it at the wall. The screen stayed green. Nothing. My sensors say the wall is solid metal, he shouted, his voice shaking with anger. But I can hear them. The swarm is inside our walls, and we are helpless. The other alien officers panicked. They started pressing buttons and running diagnostic tests, but the computers kept saying that everything was perfect, even as the air conditioning began to fail. While the aliens were shouting and running around, Captain Miller stayed very quiet. He wasn't looking at the computer screens. He was watching Barnaby. The cat was no longer sleeping. Barnaby was standing perfectly still in the middle of the room. His body was low to the ground, and his tail was twitching only at the very tip. His ears were rotated backward, locking onto a specific spot in the ceiling. The cat's pupils were so large that his eyes looked like 2 black holes. To the aliens, the cat looked like he was staring at nothing. They thought the animal had finally lost its mind due to the stress of space travel. Look at that useless creature, the science officer cried out, pointing at Barnaby. We are about to lose our oxygen, and your morale booster is staring at a light fixture. Captain Miller, get this animal out of here before I throw it into the vacuum of space. The science officer walked toward Barnaby to grab him, but Captain Miller stepped in the way. Wait, Miller said, his voice cold and serious. Barnaby isn't staring at nothing. He hears something you don't. Cats can hear frequencies that are much higher than yours or mine. And their eyes can see the tiny movements of heat and light that your sensors are programmed to ignore. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. Suddenly, the main power grid shut down. The bridge went into total darkness, lit only by the red emergency lights. The scratching sound in the walls became louder, a thousands of tiny legs kind of sound. The aliens froze in fear. They knew the shadow drones were about to eat the main computer core. If that happened, the ship would explode. They aimed their heavy laser rifles at the walls, but they didn't know where to shoot. If they missed, they might hit a fuel line and kill everyone. They were blind, trapped in the dark with an invisible killer. In the red glow of the emergency lights, Barnaby moved. He didn't run away in fear like the aliens expected. Instead, he let out a sharp, terrifying hiss that sounded like a snake. He coiled his muscles and, with a powerful leap, jumped off a console and landed high up on a ventilation grate. He stuck his claws into the metal gaps and began to growl. The aliens watched in shock. Suddenly, a tiny, metallic spark flew out of the vent. Barnaby swatted it out of the air with a speed that no alien could match. The tiny drone hit the floor, crushed and sparking. Captain Miller pulled out a small flashlight and pointed it at the floor. There, lying in the light, was a destroyed shadow drone. It was the first time any member of the Alliance had ever seen one up close. The alien sensors had failed, the cameras had seen nothing, and the guards had heard nothing, but the cat had found it. The room went silent again, but this time, it wasn't because of fear. It was because the aliens were looking at the small, orange cat with a new kind of respect. They realized that while they had been looking for a high-tech solution, the humans had brought a biological hunter that had been perfecting its craft for millions of years. However, the danger was far from over. A single drone was nothing. As Barnaby kept his eyes fixed on the vent, the scratching sound intensified. It sounded like a storm was trapped inside the ship's metal skin. Thousands more drones were coming, and they were all heading for the engine room. The aliens realized that Barnaby was the only one who could track them, but he was just one small cat against an army of machines. The suspense was unbearable as the crew waited to see what the morale booster would do next. The bridge of the flagship was a mess of red lights and screaming alarms. Commander Cax looked at the destroyed drone on the floor and then at Barnaby. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Their billion-credit scanners were useless because they were looking for energy signals, but these drones were designed to be cold and silent. They weren't machines to Barnaby, they were just fast-moving bugs. However, one cat could not catch 10,000 drones. The scratching sound in the walls was getting louder, moving away from the bridge and toward the heart of the ship, the antimatter reactor. If the drones reached the reactor, they would chew through the containment field, and the entire ship would vanish in a ball of fire. We have to stop them. Commander Cax shouted, grabbing his heavy pulse rifle. But how? We can't see them. They are inside the maintenance tunnels, and those tunnels are too small for us to move quickly. The science officer checked the tablet. The drones are moving through the ventilation shafts. They are 5 minutes away from the reactor. If we don't kill them now, we are all dead. The aliens were experts at war on a big scale, but they had no idea how to fight a war inside their own walls. They looked at Captain Miller, hoping for a miracle. Captain Miller didn't look worried. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver pen-like object. "We need to guide Barnaby," Miller said. He pressed a button, and a tiny, bright red dot appeared on the floor. Barnaby's head snapped toward the dot instantly. His body tensed up, and his tail began to horizontal flicker with excitement. To the aliens, this looked like another toy, but to the cat, that red dot was the ultimate prize. "I'm going into the tunnels with Barnaby," Miller announced. "I need one of your smallest soldiers to come with me to carry the heavy-frequency disruptor. Barnaby will find the swarm, we just need to follow him." The team entered the maintenance sector. It was a terrifying place, narrow, dark, and filled with the hum of high-voltage wires. The alien soldier, a young lizard man named Tiz, was trembling. His armor clattered against the metal walls. In front of them, Barnaby was walking with total confidence. He didn't need a flashlight. His whiskers felt the changes in the air currents, and his ears picked up the tiny tink-tink-tink of metallic legs on the pipes. Suddenly, Barnaby stopped. He looked up at a large junction box where 4 massive pipes met. He began to growl, a low, vibrating sound that felt like a warning from an ancient predator. Captain Miller pointed the red laser dot onto the junction box. Barnaby didn't hesitate. He launched himself into the air, disappearing into a small gap between the pipes. A second later, the sound of chaos erupted. There were high-pitched squeaks of metal being crushed and the sound of Barnaby's claws tearing through thin plastic. Small sparks began to fly out of the gap. Tiz, the alien soldier, held his breath. He had never seen anything move that fast. Is he winning? Tiz whispered. Suddenly, hundreds of the shadow drones realized they were being hunted. Instead of staying hidden, they swarmed out of the pipes like a silver cloud of angry bees. The suspense was terrifying. The drones weren't just eating wires anymore, they were attacking the predator. They swirled around Barnaby, trying to clog his fur and bite his skin. But the cat was a blur of orange motion. He wasn't just using his claws, he was using his weight and his speed to knock them down. However, there were too many of them. Tiz tried to aim his disruptor, but he was afraid of hitting the cat. The swarm is too thick. Tiz cried out. They are going to overwhelm him. We have to retreat. But Captain Miller didn't retreat. He kept the red laser dot moving, guiding Barnaby's attention to the largest clusters of drones. Barnaby was in a hunting trance. Every time a drone touched him, he flicked it off with lightning speed. But then, the main lights in the tunnel died completely. Total darkness. Tiz screamed in fear, feeling the tiny drones landing on his armor. He couldn't see his own hand, let alone the enemy. In the darkness, the only thing they could hear was the frantic scratching and the hiss of the cat. They were trapped in a narrow pipe, surrounded by an invisible army that was seconds away from destroying the ship's core. Suddenly, two glowing green orbs appeared in the dark. It was Barnaby's eyes, reflecting the tiny bit of light from the emergency panels. He looked like a demon from an alien myth. He let out a roar, not a meow, but a true predator's scream, and charged into the thickest part of the swarm. The sound of crunching metal intensified. The suspense reached a peak as a massive explosion of sparks lit up the tunnel, showing Barnaby standing on top of a mountain of dead drones, but more were coming from the deeper levels. The morale booster was the only thing standing between the Alliance and total destruction, and the real battle was just beginning. The air in the maintenance tunnel grew hotter and thicker as Captain Miller, Tiz the lizard soldier, and Barnaby moved deeper into the ship's belly. They were approaching the antimatter reactor core, the most dangerous place on the entire vessel. The floor was littered with the crushed silver bodies of the drones Barnaby had already destroyed, crunching under their boots like metallic beetles. Tiz was shivering, not from cold, but from pure terror. His species relied on logic and advanced sensors, both of which were useless here. He watched the small orange creature trotting ahead of them. Just minutes ago, Barnaby had been a whirlwind of violence, tearing apart a metal swarm in total darkness. Now, the cat stopped, sat down, and calmly began to lick a smudge of drone oil off his white paw. To Tiz, this ability to switch instantly from supreme violence to casual grooming was the mark of a truly deranged biological weapon. He realized the humans hadn't brought a pet, they had brought a sociopathic killer disguised in soft fur. Captain Miller ignored the heat and the noise of the thrumming engines. He was watching Barnaby's ears. They were swiveling forward, locked onto something beyond the thick blast door that separated them from the main power coupling chamber. The chaotic scratching sound of the individual drones had stopped. It was replaced by a low, unified buzzing sound, like a giant hive mind thinking as one. The behavior has changed, Miller whispered to Tiz. They aren't just eating wires randomly anymore. They are gathering. They are protecting something. Tiz gripped his disruptor rifle tighter. Protecting what, Captain? Our scanners still show nothing but magnetic interference. Miller pointed the red laser dot at the base of the blast door. Barnaby didn't pounce this time. Instead, he pressed his body flat against the floor, his tail still, and let out a low, threatening growl that vibrated through the metal grating. He was no longer hunting prey, he was stalking a rival predator. Miller manually cranked open the heavy blast door just enough for them to slip through. The sight on the other side made Tiz's 4 eyes widen in horror. The power chamber, usually a clean room filled with glowing blue energy conduits, looked like a metallic spider's web. Thousands of shadow drones were linked together, forming silver chains that were slowly wrapping around the main power regulators. If they completed the circuit, they would drain the reactor in seconds, causing a catastrophic explosion. But the most terrifying thing was in the center of the web. Hanging from the ceiling was a drone 10 times larger than the others. It was shaped like a jagged diamond, pulsing with a sickly purple light. It was the controller drone, the queen of the Vraxian swarm. It was directing the smaller drones, telling them exactly which wires to cut to kill the ship fastest. By the great nebula, Tiz breathed, raising his heavy rifle. There's the target. I have to blast it. Captain Miller grabbed the alien's arm and pulled it down sharply. Are you crazy? Miller hissed. Look where it is. That queen is sitting directly on top of the primary antimatter flow regulator. If you miss with that disruptor, or if the blast is too strong, you'll breach the core and vaporize us all. We need surgical precision. We need something that can hit the target without destroying the ship. Tiz looked at the human captain in disbelief. They were facing an advanced alien artificial intelligence that was seconds away from victory, and the human wanted to use a cat. Captain Miller didn't hesitate. He clicked the laser pointer again. The bright red dot danced across the room, over the swirling mass of smaller drones, and landed directly on the pulsing purple center of the queen drone. Barnaby saw the ultimate prize. The biggest bug he had ever seen. The cat didn't run, he calculated. He looked at the moving machinery, the hanging wires, and the distance to the target. Then, with an explosion of muscle power that defied gravity, Barnaby launched himself into the air. He bounced off a hot steam pipe, used a bundle of cables as a swing, and sailed over the army of smaller drones. The queen drone sensed the incoming biological threat and tried to rotate its sharp metallic edges, but it was too slow. Barnaby landed squarely on top of the pulsing purple machine, digging all 18 claws deep into its delicate sensor array. The chamber instantly erupted into chaos as thousands of drones turned to attack the creature that dared to touch their queen. The engine room turned into a scene of absolute chaos. The high-pitched buzzing of the drones was so loud it felt like 1,000 needles stabbing into the ears of Captain Miller and Tiz. The silver cloud of shadow drones had formed into a giant, rotating funnel, circling the queen drone to protect it. Barnaby was right in the middle of it. For a few terrifying seconds, the orange cat disappeared under a mountain of silver metal. Tiz, the alien soldier, screamed in horror. The creature is gone. The swarm has consumed it. We have failed, and now the reactor will blow. Tiz raised his heavy rifle, ready to fire wildly in despair, but Captain Miller grabbed his shoulder with a grip of iron. Don't shoot. Look. Miller shouted over the roar of the machinery. Suddenly, a flash of orange fur burst through the silver pile. Barnaby wasn't dead, he was furious. To the cat, this wasn't a war for the galaxy, this was a fight against a swarm of very annoying, very bitey metal bugs. His reflexes, honed by millions of years of Earth's evolution, were 10 times faster than any alien machine. Every time a drone tried to latch onto him, Barnaby swatted it away with a lightning-fast paw. He was a blur of orange motion, spinning and jumping in the low gravity of the reactor room. But even with his speed, there were simply too many drones. The queen drone began to pulse with a blinding, dangerous purple light. It was preparing to send a final overload command to the ship's core. If that pulse went out, the ship would turn into a star. Captain Miller knew they had only seconds left. He saw a small opening on the top of the queen drone, a cooling vent that opened and closed as the machine overheated. That was the brain of the hive. Tiz, I need a distraction. Miller yelled. Fire your disruptor at the far wall. Not the drones, the wall. Tiz was confused, but he obeyed. The loud bang of the disruptor hitting the metal wall made a massive vibration. For a split second, the drones turned their sensors toward the noise. In that second, Miller clicked his red laser pointer. He didn't point it at the ground this time. He shined the red dot directly into the dark, open cooling vent of the queen drone. Barnaby saw the red dot hide inside the enemy machine. To his predatory mind, the dot was a prize that was trying to escape. The cat let out a loud, terrifying growl and launched himself through the air. He ignored the hundreds of drones biting at his fur. He landed on the Queen's head and shoved his front paw deep into the cooling vent, reaching for the red light. His sharp claws didn't find the dot, but they found something better, the delicate, glass-like fiber cables that controlled the Queen's logic center. Barnaby grabbed the wires with his teeth and pulled with all his weight. There was a sound of snapping glass and a massive spray of blue sparks. The effect was like cutting the neck of a beast. The Queen drone let out a mechanical shriek that vibrated the floorboards. The purple light turned into a chaotic, flickering mess. All across the room, the thousands of smaller drones suddenly lost their coordination. They didn't know what to do. Some started flying into the walls, while others simply fell to the floor like heavy rain, their silver bodies clattering against the metal. The hive mind was broken. But the Queen was still dangerous. It began to shake violently, trying to throw the cat off as its internal power cells began to melt. The heat in the room was rising fast, and the reactor was screaming in protest. Tiz watched in total silence, his 4 eyes wide with a mix of fear and wonder. He saw the weak, furry pet hanging onto the back of the most dangerous machine in the Vraxian army. Barnaby didn't let go. He bit down harder, his teeth crunching through the Queen's primary processor. A final, massive explosion of white light filled the room, knocking Miller and Tiz off their feet. The sound was deafening, followed by a sudden, heavy silence. The red emergency lights flickered and then turned to a steady, calm blue. The reactor's scream faded into a soft, healthy hum. The air conditioning kicked back on, blowing away the smell of smoke. For a long minute, neither human nor alien moved. They were afraid of what they would find in the wreckage. Smoke rose from the center of the room, where the Queen drone lay in a twisted heap of blackened metal. Then, a small meow echoed through the silent chamber. Out of the smoke walked Barnaby. His orange fur was a bit dusty, and one of his ears was twitching, but he looked completely bored. He walked over to Captain Miller, sat down, and started calmly licking the soot off his front paw. He looked at the pile of dead, multi-million credit alien technology as if it were nothing more than a broken toy. Tiz fell to his knees, staring at the cat as if he were a god. The war was over, and the aliens still couldn't understand how a creature that liked to chase red dots had just saved the entire alliance. The days following the battle in the reactor core were filled with a strange, heavy silence. The USS Discovery and the Alliance flagship were safe, but the mood among the alien crew had changed completely. No one laughed at the human pet anymore. Instead, whenever Barnaby walked down a corridor, the giant, four-eyed alien soldiers would freeze and press themselves against the walls to give him a wide path. They looked at him with a mixture of terror and religious awe. To them, Barnaby was no longer a morale booster. He was a Class S biological predator, who had defeated an enemy their entire civilization could not touch. The story of the Orange Ghost, who hunted the invisible swarm, began to spread across the galaxy, growing more exaggerated with every whisper. Some said the cat had breathed fire, others claimed he was a shapeshifter who could turn into a giant tiger at will. When the Alliance High Command, a group of the oldest and most powerful alien leaders in the galaxy, arrived to inspect the ship, the tension reached a peak. These were the Great Elders, beings who had lived for hundreds of years and controlled thousands of star systems. They demanded to see the secret weapon that had saved their empire. They arrived on the bridge in their golden robes, surrounded by elite guards, expecting to see a massive machine or a genetically engineered super soldier. Commander Cax was sweating as he stood before them. "High Elders," Cax said, his voice trembling, "the hero you are looking for is currently occupied." He stepped aside, and the elders looked at the command chair. There, sitting on the most important seat in the fleet, was Barnaby. He was fast asleep, his head hanging off the edge, snoring loudly. The Great Elders were shocked. The Grand Admiral of the Alliance, a creature with skin like obsidian and eyes that glowed like stars, walked slowly toward the cat. He pulled out a scanning device and ran it over Barnaby. "This is impossible," the Admiral whispered. "There is no technology inside him. No cybernetic brains. No hidden lasers. He is just an animal. Captain Miller, how did this creature defeat the Vraxian swarm when our greatest computers failed? Captain Miller stepped forward, a small smile on his face. Computers are built on logic, Miller explained. The swarm was built on logic. They could predict your moves because you think like machines. But Barnaby? He doesn't care about logic. He's a cat. He moves on instinct and chaos. You can't program a computer to predict the movements of a predator that is just having fun. The Grand Admiral looked at the cat for a long time. Then, in a move that shocked everyone on the bridge, the most powerful leader in the galaxy bowed his head in respect. He took a small, gold and diamond medal, the highest honor for bravery, and tried to pin it on Barnaby's fur. Barnaby woke up, looked at the shiny medal, and immediately tried to bite it. Then, he swatted the Grand Admiral's hand away and jumped off the chair, walking toward a nearby sunbeam to resume his nap. The aliens gasped, but the Grand Admiral laughed. He treats the leaders of the galaxy like they are his servants, the Admiral said. This is the most human thing I have ever seen. You humans didn't just bring an animal, you brought a partner that reflects your own wild spirit. As the USS Discovery prepared to leave for its next mission, the Alliance made a historic decision. They didn't ask for more human weapons or more human ships. Instead, they asked for a biological exchange program. Within a month, every major ship in the Galactic Alliance was required to have at least one Earth cat on board. The aliens spent billions of credits building high-tech, climbing towers, and buying tons of premium tuna. They even tried to build robotic laser pointers, but they quickly realized that nothing worked better than a human hand holding a simple plastic toy. The war with the Vraxian swarm had been won, not by a better bomb, but by the ancient bond between a man and his cat. The final scene of the story takes place years later. In the Great History Museum of the Alliance, there is a giant statue made of pure white marble. It isn't a statue of a king or a general. It is a statue of a small, orange cat sitting on a pile of broken drones. Under the statue, the inscription reads, "To the humans, thank you for bringing your monsters to save us. We still don't understand how they work, and we are still afraid of them, but we are glad they are on our side." Back on the USS Discovery, Barnaby sat on the captain's shoulder, looking out at the stars. He didn't care about the medals, the statues, or the galaxy he had saved. He only cared about one thing: the captain was about to open a fresh can of salmon, and for Barnaby, that was the only victory that truly mattered.